Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. This is Gail of Gaia, and this is Free Range, where we graze on all kinds of ideas. And today we'll be talking about some of that um, grass that we graze on. And I have with me tonight an absolute expert, Dr. Stephanie Seneff. She has 4 degrees from MIT in biology, computer science, and chemical and electrical engineering. I'm sorry. So let me bring her on, and you can tell us a little more about yourself, Stephanie. I'm so happy that you're with us because the information that you bring forward is so important. And we've talked before because you know I have a background as a nutritionist, and it was been so frustrating trying to educate people about glyphosate and the
R-
dangers of GMOs.
Right. Yes, it's very difficult to get people convinced that this chemical is toxic because they've been told otherwise for so long and they're so comfortable with it. They know
Right.
they can. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, right after I had a previous show with you, I did a presentation while I was in Nevada at the time, and there was a guy in the audience, and he just argued with me vehemently that there's nothing wrong with it. I don't see what your issue is. I've been using it for years, and I'm going, okay, just wait till you get cancer.
I know.
But anyway,
It's subtle. The problem is that it's a slow kill, and it slowly gets into your tissues and erodes your metabolic health over time, and you don't realize that you're being slowly poisoned. It's subtle, and I think that's a huge issue. And of course, the government has insisted that it's absolutely safe. The EPA recently just said, yeah, it's fine, no cancer, even though of course others are saying otherwise, and we've got all these lawsuits going. So people are starting to wake up because of the lawsuits. I think it's awesome that all of these people have come out of the woodwork claiming that glyphosate caused their non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. There's now tens of thousands of them. And it started with I still remember the day so clearly when that verdict came through with the first one with Dwayne Lee Johnson. It was so exciting. I was kind of watching the trial and I was like, this isn't going to work. Those guys are going to win. They always win. They have such great lawyers. And I was so shocked when I heard that he was awarded a huge amount of money. I think it was at the time 283 million, including damages because of Monsanto's false claims. And eventually it got shrunk down, but I think he finally got a sizable sum. And then there were two others that followed, and also jury trial, also won huge amounts of money. And after those three, then there became thousands and tens of thousands. And so Bayer is really struggling with what to do about glyphosate now because of that. I feel it's really had a huge impact. I've really started to appreciate lawyers, ever since I've been in this fight, because they're the ones that can really make a difference.
they're the only ones that can at this point in time, really. Otherwise, it's just ignored, and
Yes, it's hard to get the message out. Most people are so busy they don't read, and they've got so many
exactly.
sound bites coming at them and so much disinformation from the mainstream, assuring them that everything's fine, the food's fine, don't worry about it. So it's a
I
hard sell.
It is. It's a hard enough sell as it is to get people to even switch to organic food. 'Cause, oh, it's too expensive. Oh, I can't afford it. I can't. But the price you pay down the road is far
I know,
more.
and I can tell you personally, our personal experience. My husband and I started eating only organic probably 10 years ago,
Mhm.
and he had type 2 diabetes. He was taking two different medications for it, and right now he isn't taking any drugs, and his blood sugar is terrific. I mean, it just went away.
I that's something that I specifically remember from a previous show that I did with you. We looked at graphs and saw the increase. Maybe you have them with you today because I think it's worth people knowing this. That ever since GMOs were introduced, and they need to know that GMOs are saturated
Yeah. So you have
glyphosate.
those graphs, right? Can you put them up or?
I have, yes. Okay. Is that in those graphs?
Yeah, well, I can show you what I assembled for you. We can go through those because I just picked a bunch of graphs. There's so many. There's a lot more that I'm leaving out, but it's pretty impressive. And that's sort of what led me. I basically heard about glyphosate first at a conference, 2012. I happened to be at a conference. It was, autism was a topic that I was really into, and I'd been studying
Oh
it for
yeah.
felt there was a connection to the vaccines that the kids were getting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I knew there was something missing. I couldn't figure out what it was. Something in the gut. I saw they had troubles with the gut, and something they were getting poison. I thought maybe from their food. I didn't know what it could be. And this guy, Don Huber, Professor Don Huber, he's over 80 years old. He's still very active. He gave an amazing presentation that I heard at that conference. That was when I first knew the word glyphosate. I didn't know what it was when I walked into the room. And
Mm-hmm.
he laid it out so beautifully that I went away from that 2-hour experience feeling like I had the answer. I had the answer. And I went back home and I read everything I could. And, the first paper I found was one by Professor Seralini in France, an amazing paper where they had exposed rats to low-dose glyphosate for their entire lifespan. And the thing is, the industry had done studies with the same dosage of exposing rats to glyphosate over 3 months. And then they said, oh, yeah, 3 months, everything's fine. No problem. This stuff is safe.
It's kind of
And
short term, isn't it?
it shouldn't be normally. In fact, the industry said 3 months was enough. If you didn't see anything by 3 months, you're good to go. That's the trouble with glyphosate. It's insidious and it's cumulative. So they started seeing problems at 4 months. And by the time the rats died, gosh, they had all kinds of problems. Huge mammary tumors in the females, kidney disease, liver disease, reproductive issues, early death, really a lot of stuff.
And I think what I remember too from our graphs, and we'll see them again here in a minute, was the huge increase in type 2 diabetes and the huge increase in obesity.
Exactly. Both of those, I think, is a direct hit. I mean, I see it countries around the world. As soon as they start adopting Western diet, they start getting fat around the world, and the countries that still aren't eating the Western diet are still skinny. It's quite striking in Africa, actually, because Africa is a binomial distribution. Most of the countries in Africa are skinny. The average, weight of the population is very low. No obesity problem whatsoever in most of the countries. South Africa is a big exception, and also the ones along the Mediterranean coast, who get most of their food imported because it's all desert there, And South Africa grows a lot of glyphosate-resistant corn. They have a lot of glyphosate. They've had it long and deep in South Africa, and they've got an obesity problem. So it really it fits beautifully in Africa.
Yeah, and again, that's something slow and insidious that takes time, and so people don't blame it. Same with the VCS, or you know what I'm talking about. And so that's all a big issue. Well, I can start showing the slides.
Sure,
if you like.
that'd be great. Yeah,
we'll
just walk through them, and I'll just explain them one by one.
Okay.
So you can go on to the next one. This is just the heading. So this is the one that is autism, and this is really striking to me because that red box is showing that the numbers are reporting in the blue graph are reporting on the previous 4 years cumulative of glyphosate, and then it's the 6-year-old kids, the rate of autism in school, and it's a year graph on the bottom, goes from like 1991.
I'm sorry, I don't know how to make
that.
Maybe I can make that go over to the side here. Let me try this.
Yeah.
There, that's better, isn't
it? That's good. Yes.
Okay.
So you can see that the two curves coincide. I mean, there's a perfect match between the rate of autism in first grade in the United States and the amount of glyphosate used on core crops over the previous 4 years. So I think this is really a stunning graph, and we can go on to other graphs because they're all stunning in my opinion. But look at this correlation coefficient, 0.9972. Even if you get like 0.6, it's pretty good. And 1.0 is the highest it can be. That's a perfect match. So this is basically a perfect match. And it has an incredibly low p-value for the likelihood that it could have occurred by chance.
Well, some people might not understand exactly what that means. So could you explain that a little more?
Right. I know. That's it. And, people say, oh, correlation doesn't mean causation. That's what they always come back at when I show them these graphs. Correlation doesn't mean causation. They've been trained by the industry to think that way. And, if you're looking for causation, the first thing you have to see is there a correlation? If there's no correlation, then it's extremely hard to convince anybody that there's a causal factor there, right? If it's like lead is going down, lead can cause autism, and it certainly can damage the brain. But the amount of lead exposure is going down over time. So it's not what's causing the epidemic. You can rule it out, even though it could be, it could cause it in a particular case, but it's not what's causing the epidemic. That has to be something pervasive in the environment. And all the kids, I think the entire population is being exposed to glyphosate, and some more than others, of course. But so the p-value is a numerical calculation that you do. There's a formula for it, and it's supposed to be predicting the likelihood that what you observe could have happened totally by chance. In other words, that there is no causal relationship. When you get a p-value of 0.00000001, which is what we get with these data, it means it's extremely unlikely that this could be just a chance occurrence, that these two things went up exactly in step like this.
So basically it's saying, even though they want to say it isn't, there's definitely a relationship.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to say there's not a relationship when you see that kind of correlation.
Okay, should I go to the next one?
Sure.
Okay.
And that applies to all of these. This one is actually not a graph. I just wanted to show this one because it's important, because the shikimate pathway is the pathway in the plants that glyphosate disrupts. And it's a major, really important biological pathway in the plants. The claim that Monsanto made is that, this chemical is great because it disrupts this pathway that our human cells do not have the pathway. They have nothing in that pathway. And this means that they can't make the products of that pathway. The human cells can't make it. They rely on the gut microbes to supply it to them. And the products of that pathway are incredibly important to our health. And that's what this is showing. So you see this shikimate going to corismate and glyphosate blocking it. That's a step in that pathway that glyphosate blocks. And as a consequence, you don't get corismate. And if you don't get corismate, then you can't get all these things on the right that are derived from it.
Oh my goodness. Vitamin K and B vitamins.
Yes. And then, of course, I don't know if you know dopamine, adrenaline, serotonin, melatonin, melanin, thyroid hormone. Those are all really important hormones.
Oh my God. Yes.
And neurotransmitters. And melanin, the skin tanning agent. I mean, these things are really, really important. And then the top one is the aromatic amino acids. Those are in the building. They're the building blocks of proteins. Those are among the 20. There's 3 out of the 20 essential amino acids that code for the proteins, and that's the DNA code. They're essential for all these proteins that are do all kinds. They're the workhorses of the body. So you have a deficiency in all of these things when you are wrecking your gut microbes' ability to make corismate.
So those 3 amino acids are what make the dopamine, adrenaline, serotonin, melatonin, melanin, and thyroid hormone. And it's a small wonder we have as many health problems as we have when that type of thing is interrupted.
Exactly. Exactly. It makes a lot of sense.
Yes, it does. Wow.
So you can go on to the next one.
Okay.
And we can go through these quickly. This one's interesting because it shows the blue line is the glyphosate usage over time. Again, this is like from 1990 to 2010. And the blue line is the glyphosate usage, and the red is the development of glyphosate-resistant weeds. The weeds became resistant to the glyphosate over time with exposure, and that's what's driving the increased use. So what happened? The more and more glyphosate was used over time as the weeds became more and more resistant because they couldn't kill it. They had to make a higher concentration to kill the weeds.
And then, of course, they made the seeds so they could be totally saturated or soaked.
Exactly. Yeah, they changed the enzyme in the pathway to make it resistant to glyphosate, so it wasn't affected. It was a brilliant idea, demonic, because that made it easy for the farmer to not have to worry about getting glyphosate on the crop. But the trouble is the crop takes it up and it puts it into the seed. So you get seed crops have high, like seed oils are going to have lots of glyphosate in them because they're sprayed. So canola oil is a GMO Roundup ready crop. Soybeans. So.
And these are the types of oils. And I have to say this, as a nutritionist, many years ago, those oils were pushed as being really healthy, and they were not. And we did not know about the manufacturing element behind it or the all the dangers involved. And it's
yes,
sickening.
and we did a massive campaign to discourage people from using butter and lard, saturated fat.
Yes.
We were told that's really bad.
And so that's kind of why I left nutritionists. I don't want to be telling people something that's I think they tell us is right, and then I find out down the road that it's probably one of the worst things they could have done.
They seem to be very good at recommending exactly the wrong thing. That's what I've seen. The nutritionists are so out of it. I mean, They basically want you to buy the things that the processed food industry makes. And they've done a
Exactly.
really good job of convincing you that all the natural foods are not good for you. It's so strange because
It,
we use butter and lard. Those are the main fats that we use in cooking in my household.
uh-huh. And then there's a big push for the vegetarianism and veganism, and actually, you're going to be consuming more glyphosate.
Right. And then when you eat the plant, it's directly from the plant that you're going to get the glyphosate. And
And
I think a
unfortunately,
vegan diet is a really bad idea. And of course, it's been promoted that eating animals is for the sake of the environment because of global climate change and the cows releasing the gases and all this stuff.
that is such a joke. I mean, about the cows and the gases and so on. I just can't. I just shake my head. What can I say?
Yeah, I mean, they do in fact release a lot of gas, and the reason why they do is because glyphosate disrupts their gut. The CAFO cows, the cows that are eating all the glyphosate, they eat huge amounts of glyphosate in their feed, and it disrupts their gut microbiome. And it's very, very interesting because I think humans, like autistic kids, they have a lot of issues with bloating, their gas in their belly, because
Hmm.
the microbes that actually turn that gas back into nutritional food are broken by glyphosate. They're disrupted. And so the gas is produced by one set of bacteria, and then another set is supposed to bring it back in and make really healthy organic matter out of it. That step gets broken by glyphosate, and so the gas gets released, and then you have the methane, which is actually a very bad greenhouse gas that the cows are producing. But I think if you had the cows eating grass, organic grass, we can't
Nope.
eat grass. So whatever food we get out of the cow is food we would not have because we can't digest grass. And there's a lot of grass on the planet. So cows are a way to turn grass into nutritious food.
And then the other thing of it is if I understand this correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, glyphosate is stored in the bones. And if it's stored in the bones, I was freaked out when I found out about it because everybody was pushing bone broth.
I know. I know
Going,
that's
oh
really
my
a problem
God.
because bone broth is actually a super, super nutritious food, except for the fact that the animal that came from has probably been filled up with glyphosate. So that makes it very dangerous. So if you're going to, I like bone broth and I encourage people to do it, but you've got to take, grass fed beef, organic chicken. I mean, you've got to use organic there
Yeah.
to make it high quality because it's going to have a lot of glycine in it. And we can get to this in a moment, but the
Okay.
glyphosate messes up glycine in a big way. So this one's pretty amazing, this paper. I was really shocked by what I saw here. And there's three graphs
Whoa.
here. The one
Okay.
on the left is looking at sperm count. So this is data from the United States government that's fully available. You can read the paper. I have the reference there at the bottom. The one on the left is showing a reduction in sperm count as a function of the amount of glyphosate used in each state. So this is basically the 50 states of the United States, looking at whole data for the 50 states, how much glyphosate is used on the crops, and then what is the sperm count of the population. And so sperm counts are going down, basically. Glyphosate is affecting both motility and a number of the sperm in the male reproductive system. The middle one is testicular cancer. That one is really shocking because look at that p-value at the bottom. P less than 0. You see all those zeros?
0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Yeah.
See, and you can see the dots and then the line. Very, very strong correlation between the rise in testicular cancer over time and the rise in glyphosate usage on cord crops. And the third one is a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which we know about from all the lawsuits. And it's not as strong as the testicular cancer, but it's still very good with a value less than 0.0053. So
Wow.
that's quite good, very good actually. 0.05 is what they consider to be significant. Anything less than 0.05 for the p-value is considered significant. So these are very significant numbers. All of these have very, very low p-values.
It's just amazing. I'll go to the next one. It's very disturbing.
Yeah, so this was a paper I did together with Nancy Swanson and Judy Hoy, who's a really cool lady. She's in Montana. She lives in the mountains of Montana, and she's been studying the wildlife there for many years. And we did a neat paper together, the three of us, that was comparing the wildlife, her data on the wildlife and the disruption of their health by the chemicals that were being used in the nearby farms, and looking at our data from the U.S. government on disease numbers, cases. So to see the rise in the incidence of different kinds of diseases. And so this plot is of And these are newborn genitourinary disorders. And so the main ones were hypospadias and hydrocele. So you can see on the bottom left, you have this hydrocele, it's like a swollen testis. And then hypospadia is where the tip where you pee is low down. It's not at the tip of the penis, it's below. It's along the line, coming out too early. And so these conditions are going up very steadily in step with the rise in glyphosate usage, with a very low p-value, again, at 0.000024. So very significant.
We live in such a toxic environment. And, it would seem like when people went to the doctor, the first thing that should be checked are heavy metals and toxins, and it's never done.
I know. I mean, nobody measures glyphosate. It's amazing. I shouldn't say nobody, because there are now more and more, especially alternative medicine specialists, who are learning to check for glyphosate. And there was a study actually looking at a fatty liver disease, which is another thing that's going up dramatically, exactly in step with glyphosate usage. And there was a study that showed, I don't think I have a plot for it, but we can leave this here. This is the kidney disease, acute kidney disease death rate. But the toxic liver disease, fatty liver disease, and they looked at glyphosate in the urine, and they had three groups: the people who didn't have fatty liver disease, the people who had a milder case, and the people who had a more severe case. And they found statistically significant differences in the level of glyphosate in the urine in all three classes. I was really surprised by that, because I think of that as a very short-term measure, and I wouldn't have expected it to show up in that way. I mean, it's very striking. There's another study that showed that rats got fatty liver disease after being exposed to low-dose glyphosate. So it's completely consistent. In my book, I should mention my book, Toxic Legacy.
Oh, yes, definitely.
I'll hold that up later, because right now I guess we're seeing these graphs. But in my book, I have a chapter on the liver.
So is this graph showing that
kidney disease? Mm-hmm.
And that it's increased because
so this is, you can see there was a peak back in the early in the 1990. Is that 1980, I can't quite.
Yeah, the early
1990. Yeah, before that, there was a peak there that probably had to do with some other chemical going on at that time.
That's right around when I think the GMOs and the glyphosate were starting to be used heavily. I was working on a book at that time, so it said Good Health Through Age 120, and I talked about some of this, and it was funny, but it wasn't funny. Actually, I sent it to a doctor to get like an endorsement, a synopsis, and a possible endorsement or whatever, and the computer crashed within 24 hours. Wow. And I was never able to retrieve the information again, because it was just when they were starting the push for all of this.
Yeah.
I was depressed for 6 months.
I think that first peak is due to some other chemical, because glyphosate was very, very low at that time. That was even almost, it was early days for glyphosate. But you see the second rise towards the end. Is the glyphosate usage, I think, is the blue line, and the GMO crops is the red line, and the yellow boxes are the disease, the rate of death rate from acute kidney disease over time, according to the U.S. data. So all three curves match very nicely.
Okay, wow. Okay, here's the next.
And this one's inflammatory bowel disease, and that's also a very good match. So it's just amazing, all these diseases. I don't have obesity here, but that's another one that is perfect match. I didn't put that curve in here.
I remember that one. That one stood out. I think it was in one of the previous shows that we had done together, because I remember that you had the type 2 diabetes and the obesity, and it would, it was a graph looked just like this, as
right. They're all perfect. Diabetes, obesity, and then of course liver disease, kidney disease. And also various cancers, which I also don't have here, but I would have bored the audience if I showed all the graphs. But it's just amazing how many there are and how perfectly matched they are. It's really, really terrifying. I really think glyphosate is the most important chemical in our environment. And it's really because it's so pervasive. It's not tested for. The government doesn't care. People think it's safe. All those factors are causing us to be heavily exposed, and also because it's insidious and slow, so we don't realize we're being poisoned.
Just like the other V things we've talked about, it's insidious and slow over time, and so there is a lack of you can come up with the correlation, but people don't correlate it in their head because it's been too much time has passed since that happened. So how could it possibly be that when it was that right out the gate?
I
It's
know that's the thing is, when it doesn't happen right away, you don't think it's causing you trouble.
exactly.
And what else have we got here? I think we've got some celiac disease. That's an interesting one because this is glyphosate usage on wheat compared with celiac disease, and it matches better, much better with the usage on wheat than it does with the usage on corn and soy, which makes sense because wheat is the factor in celiac
Now,
disease.
I have to ask you something about wheat. Now, if they grow wheat organically, okay, they can't still desiccate the wheat with the Roundup, can they?
No, they can't.
Oh, thank goodness. Because
Yeah.
somebody was saying they could, and I'm going, oh, no, you got to be kidding. I'm going to quit eating bread altogether.
No, they can't. That's why you really have to buy organic wheat. And wheat's not a GMO food. So people sometimes think, oh, non-GMO, that's great, I'll buy it. But that's not going to be good enough. Many of the highest levels of glyphosate are showing up in non-GMO foods because they're sprayed. Many foods are sprayed right before harvest. The wheat, the oats, barley, sugarcane, and the legumes,
So,
lentils, chickpeas, garbanzo beans, all
yeah,
sprayed right before harvest.
I was shocked at how high the glyphosate levels were in, like hummus.
I know that really shocked me too. I was so stunned. I hadn't realized that. It's hard to get that information, so it's frustrating because the government's not bothering to test.
And it's
So
suppressed. Another thing they haven't checked nutrient levels of foods for eons.
Oh, I know. That's another one. I think it would be really wonderful if we could develop tools that would make it easy to test for nutrient levels of different crops and to be able to show that your crop has high levels of, various essential minerals and whatever else you could find in there that are important nutrients that you could measure in the crop and show that it's a very healthy crop would be
It's a,
really an important way to measure the value of your crop, because what we look for only really is yield. You're looking for high yield, and you get a high yield of a crop that doesn't have any nutritional value. It's not worthwhile. You're just getting calories.
exactly. And we have a lot of that, of just getting calories and not getting any nutrients.
Yeah, the minerals are definitely being
Oh
depleted
my,
by glyphosate, and that's one of the things that Don Huber talked about in his presentation. He showed amazing plots he had actually done studies on the crops exposed to glyphosate versus not, and he looked at the mineral content of things like zinc and sulfur and iron and cobalt, and he found that the numbers were way down in the crops that were exposed to glyphosate. So you're getting mineral deficiencies. We have a lot of issues with mineral deficiencies in our diet.
very, very, very many. And I remember way back doing some research on minerals that there were complaints to Congress in the 40s about the soil not having any minerals in it. And now look where
It's
here we
much
at.
worse. It's
It's
just
much
gotten
worse.
worse and worse every year. Yeah, and of course, there's a lot of runoff too because there's not enough organic matter in the soil now because glyphosate's killing. It even kills the earthworms, so they're not, doing. They do an important. They play an
Oh,
important role in soil health. They're being killed by glyphosate, and you don't have enough organic matter. So then, when it rains, the soil just washes away. It doesn't really stick around. It's very easy to wash it away. So we're losing all the topsoil. We're
and I
going to
find
have a lot of problems, I think, with the droughts. Of course, we've got the climate issue as well, and the soil being so bad and the crops being so weak, and so it's just really, I think we're going to have trouble maintaining adequate food supplies in the future.
yes, and that's very disturbing because they're talking about food shortages already, and they're helping create that through some of the things that are being done politically and otherwise. But we won't get into that.
But
But
we'll finish
this,
up our last slide, which is just a big set here of 5 different displays of various correlations: autism, ADHD, schizophrenia, anxiety, and sleep disorder. There's another one, suicide, which is also going up. I don't have that here
what about
exactly.
ADD?
ADD is the same thing as ADHD,
Oh, okay.
attention deficit disorder. So all of these neurological diseases are going up. Anxiety, sleep disorder is a huge one. I mean, there's just a huge problem with sleep these days, and I think glyphosate's causing that. It's interesting actually because it really messes up the pineal gland, and it might even be worth talking about a very specific thing about the pineal gland because I was delighted to see a paper come out in 2020, I think it was, very recently, maybe even 21, a study on autism. And they looked specifically at the ability to add sulfate to molecules. I bring this up because a sulfate is a critical thing in the body that I think is majorly disrupted by glyphosate, and it's a big topic of my book. And that paper showed that the autistic kids had a defect in the enzyme that sticks sulfate onto things, and that turns out to be incredibly important. And they looked at the pineal gland after they had died. They looked at the amount of heparin sulfate, the amount of heparin sulfate in the pineal gland of the autistic kids, and it was in the toilet. I mean, it was very low compared to non-autistic controls. And at the same time, they looked at the enzyme activity of the enzyme that would put the sulfate onto the heparin sulfate, and also very, very low, strikingly low in autism. And they have problems with sulfating in the gut as well, so they can't sulfate. They have these overgrowth of these bacteria called Clostridia, and the Clostridia produce toxic metabolites that could be removed by the liver, but that removal involves attaching sulfate. And the enzyme that attaches the sulfate gets broken by glyphosate. I believe that's a critical aspect of autism. And I wrote about it in my book, but I was really happy to see this paper. This paper came out too late for me to have. I think it must have been 2021. It wasn't in my book, but I was really delighted to see it because it was hit right on what I was predicting. And I was saying, I think glyphosate's disrupting this enzyme. And they didn't say glyphosate's disrupting it. They just said these autistic kids have a very low, this enzyme's not working for them. It's very, very important in so many ways in your body.
And another thing, without getting real specific, but according to the VCS schedule of things, children's health has declined substantially. And the, what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, I lost my train of thought there. But let me ask this question. Would hemp help to re-enrich the soil?
I think so, for sure. I've heard really good things about hemp, and it's interesting because, of course, the marijuana has also had a lot of value in medicine lately. It's kind of amazing how quickly that became okay, right, to use basically a what is it called? CBD, yeah. I want to say CJD.
I was like me.
I've had CJD on the brain, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, but CBD, yeah. Cannabinoids, to use cannabinoids to treat disease, which is quite interesting. But the hemp apparently is very, very good at soaking up the glyphosate. Now, I don't know if that means that you have to be very careful not to smoke non-organic pot. I think that's a concern, whether they're using glyphosate.
Well, there's the other thing that I've heard. There is a chemical that's sprayed on it so that they can make sure that they tax it. And who knows what that chemical is. And then there's another chemical I know that we're exposed to that is affecting fertility, and that's atrazine. I don't know if you know about that one.
Oh, I know about atrazine. Yes, absolutely. That's an amazing story. Also, very nasty herbicide, possibly even worse than glyphosate. But they've what was his name? I lost his name, but there's a researcher in California who, academic researcher in California who did a lot of studies on atrazine, and he did studies on atrazine exposure to tadpoles, and he showed that it messed up their sexual development. It could produce male frogs that could lay eggs, that could produce eggs. They had both the male and the female components of the reproductive system.
Is that what they're trying to do to humans now?
Because I do wonder. I think
I've seen pictures of pregnant men, and I'm going, "Oh my God, you got to be kidding me!"
Not just pregnant men, but transgender. It's almost a taboo topic to suggest that transgender might be caused by chemicals in our environment, but I absolutely think that's the case. We've got so many. It's amazing how many people are very confused about their gender. That doesn't make any sense to me,
Oh, I know. It doesn't make any sense to me either. By the way, we do carry a hemp paste product, which you take orally, that, has, the legal limit for the THC is so low they can't, it's, you can have it all over the United States, and it's totally organic.
That's nice. Very, very good. That's wonderful.
And people have had remarkable results with it. in terms of a number of different problems, from pain to dementia and so on. So anyway, that's important. And then,
well, I should actually say something again about glyphosate, because I suspect that there's a reason why people are responding to cannabinoids. There's actually a natural endogenous cannabinoid that's produced by the human. The human cells can make a sort of equivalent to marijuana. And
uh-huh.
the enzyme that does that is a cytochrome P450 enzyme. And glyphosate has been shown to disrupt the cytochrome P450 enzymes. It suppresses them. And so I suspect that our ability to make the natural form that we need is defective because of exposure to glyphosate. And that's why we're deficient in this. And therefore we need some external supplement, just like the melatonin, because melatonin comes out of the shikimate pathway. Lots of people are taking melatonin, and melatonin is a wonderful, it has many excellent properties as far as helping the metabolism, and of course helping sleep. But I think glyphosate is disrupting the levels of melatonin in the body,
Which is
really
why people
serious
are
problem.
ending up taking it, because
Exactly.
the whole pathway's been disrupted, and who
It's the
knows what
same
else
thing.
has been disrupted. I don't think people will get anywhere near the B vitamins that they need either.
Well, there you go, and that's also coming out of the shikimate pathway. So
It's,
that pathway produces these, the aromatics. They're rings. They're carbon rings. And the carbon rings are so central to so many aspects of metabolism. That's what's happening, is that even the plants, that they make all kinds of interesting products, like polyphenols and flavonoids, these terpenoids. These things are really good nutritious value to eat. Raw, just to eat raw plants actually has a lot of good nutrition if it's organic.
mhm.
But those molecules all come out of the shikimate pathway. So the plant, and those are also defensive molecules that they make to protect themselves from insects and from fungus. So they become deficient in their immune response, in their ability to fight off these pests. And then you have to use more of the chemicals that kill them. So you just get into an awful cycle there, with the glyphosate weakening the plant, so that the plant needs all these other chemicals to protect it from the fungus and from the insects.
Well, now I know I asked you about this ahead of time and you're not familiar with it, but we're going to put it up there. Um, oh, wait a minute. Let me take this. I think we're done with the
Yeah, let's take this down
chart.
so we can get back, and I can show you my book. Here's my book.
Okay,
Yeah,
there it
Toxic
is.
Legacy: How the Weed Killer Glyphosate is Destroying Our Health and the Environment. And so, yeah, I've got that book focuses on what I believe to be the insidious cumulative mechanism of toxicity that makes glyphosate so special, because it has a unique mechanism that no other chemical has, which is to replace glycine in proteins. It gets
Let's
in by
talk about
mistake.
that a little bit.
It's very
Glycine,
important, I think. Yeah.
it's in almost all our tissues, isn't it? Glycine?
Oh yeah, glycine's everywhere. It's one of the, just like the aromatic amino acids, it's one of the amino acids that are the building blocks of the proteins, and the proteins are the workhorses of the body. So
Mhm.
that's the DNA code. You hear about the DNA code. It's a 4-letter code,
Mhm.
3 letters at a time, and each 3-letter sequence codes for a specific amino acid. So there are codes that code for glycine, and the protein is assembled according to the code to put together a bunch of amino acids to create a really interesting molecule that can do all kinds of interesting things.
And if I recall, the glycine is in particular importance in joints and ligaments.
Yes, absolutely. That's what's so. I was really amazed when I found out that collagen, so collagen is the most common protein in the body. 25% of our proteins are collagen molecules, and it's the glue that holds us together. It's in the bones, it's in the joints, it's even in just the skin, the tissues, the brain, everywhere. Collagen is a very, very common protein in the body, and it has a long sequence of a pattern that goes GXY, 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 where every third amino acid is a glycine. It's an extremely glycine-rich protein, which
So,
means that it has lots and lots of opportunities for glyphosate to mess it up.
so when glyphosate, it's no wonder when I think about that we have so many people with hip replacements, knee replacements. Our joints are just being deteriorated because this glycine is being substituted uh, with the glyphosate.
Yes, that's what I think, and it messes up its structure. The collagen has a beautiful triple helix structure. It's really pretty and really elegant, and it depends upon that sequence with all those glycines to make that work. So when you start throwing in glyphosate here and there, it totally just screws that up, and it can't make a proper structure. It doesn't have the proper, tensile strength and elasticity and ability to hold water. All those things get messed up, and the collagen becomes sick. And we have people, who are suffering from this kind of sagging of their abdominal tissues, where they get kind of everything sort of collapsing down, and they end up with this a prolapse. What is it called? A uterine prolapse or something. There's an epidemic in this problem of everything just sagging down, not being able to hold itself up, because I think the structure is just not strong enough with all that wreckage from the glyphosate.
And it's glyphosate. Is there a way to detox from glyphosate?
Yeah, there are some products that are being offered, and in particular, I see fulvic acid and humic acid mentioned a lot. And there are products like Ion Biome. I'm aware of Ion Biome, which is produced by Zach Bush, Dr. Zach Bush.
Oh yeah, I like
People
it.
I've heard good things about it.
Mhm.
I've taken it too, so it seems very safe, and it's got fulvic acid, but I think it also has some probiotics and minerals. So these are all the things that you sort of need to help rejuvenate, restore the health of your gut, because that's a really critical thing. People get the disease starts with the gut getting disrupted by the glyphosate, and then it goes south from there. Once you get a leaky gut, and Zach Bush has published peer-reviewed papers where he shows that glyphosate causes the leaky gut syndrome, that is, so many people are having trouble with that. Once your gut is leaky, all kinds of nasty things can get out into circulation, including, for example, proteins, undigested proteins, because glyphosate disrupts the ability to digest the proteins. That's where you get into the gluten intolerance, the casein intolerance, peanut allergy. I mean, all these different allergies that we're seeing to proteins is a consequence, I think, of two things. One is that glyphosate it actually disrupts the microbes that assist in the breaking down of these proteins. And I wrote about that in my book. But it also then causes a leaky gut, so those proteins don't stay inside the gut. They go out into circulation. When you have whole proteins, which are sequences of amino acids, peptides, really, just pieces of proteins that didn't get digested, and they're circulating in the blood, the immune cells are not going to like that at all. They're going to see a foreign protein in the blood. They're going to develop antibodies to it. And then what happens is that you have a human protein that has a similar sequence, and this is called molecular mimicry. And your immune cells start attacking that by mistake. It's like they're nearsighted. They can't see quite straight, and they don't realize it's not quite the same sequence that they had trained against. And then they end up attacking human proteins and causing all kinds of autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and multiple sclerosis. And of course, autism, I think, is also related to that feature.
And this is so disturbing because this chronic disease that so many people are experiencing is largely so closely related to the consumption of food that is high in glyphosate. But trying to convince people of this has been monumental. Because people are very defensive about what they eat right out the gate. Okay, and then you add these other elements in, and there's a lot of resistance. But organic food, I highly recommend everyone to fit it into your budget somehow. I mean, it needs to be a priority. It really.
Yeah, I think you'll get the money back, because it's very expensive once you get sick, and you could even end up on disability and you won't be able to work. I mean, there are ways you could lose a huge amount of money if you get sick because of chronic exposure to glyphosate. You want to avoid that as best you can, and the easiest way to do it is to eat only certified organic food. I really believe that, and
I
that's
do
what we
too.
do. When we're at home, it's harder to find when you go out to eat, and we
Oh
don't go
yeah,
out
it's
very
almost
much, but
it's
it's
yeah,
harder
it's
to
almost
find.
impossible to do. And
Yes, I'm looking
but
forward to the time when the restaurant has a organic choice on the menu.
isn't it amazing though to think
Yeah,
the most natural form of food, we have to call it organic and we have to get it certified when that was the way it was supposed to be in the first place.
I
I mean,
know, it's
you
really
know,
frustrating, and actually, the certification process has apparently gotten more complicated. I've talked to a farmer who here in Kauai who had gotten certified, and you have to renew your certification process, and the renewal got more and more complicated. And they're a small farm; they don't have a lot of money, and so she said, I lost my certification because I couldn't afford the cost of getting it renewed. That was really sad. And she's still organic, but she's not certified anymore. So it's very hard on the small farms. It really forces you into the big farm system, which is the wrong system. So I feel really bad that the people who are just growing the food the right way are the ones who have to prove that they're doing that. Whereas you would think it's the ones that are growing it the wrong way, that need to be challenged and make sure their food is
exactly,
safe.
and they get all the grants and the funding.
Yeah, that's right. The government supports them. I mean, it's just amazing. If they would just take the money away from the big farms, the big chemical-based agricultural farms, take all that money, subsidies away, and give it to the organic farmers, we could really make a big difference in the way our food is grown. We need to get back to the small farms. I think the small family farms is the answer.
I agree 100%. That's the only thing that's going to save us. I mean, what we put in our mouth is critically important, whether it be water or food.
Mm-hmm.
And don't we have problems with the water as well because of the runoff?
We do. Yes. I mean, I worry about how many people have glyphosate contamination in their water, especially I think if they're using well water and they live near a farm, it's probably getting into their water supply. Fortunately, when they do the purification of the water, for at the what do you call it? I've forgotten. The system, the water purification systems of the towns, municipal water treatment plants.
Okay, well, yeah, and so now we're dealing with glyphosate in the water, fluoride in the water.
Oh, there's so much stuff in the water. And all the chemicals too that we're taking, like the chemotherapy that the cancer patients are taking. I worry about that in the water. It doesn't break down, and they just ends up in the water, and then the water eventually gets treated, and then it can be used. Who knows where it goes? I mean, it's actually really interesting to think about the whole sewage system, because back in the day, they used to just dump it out into the ocean. And then they found out the fish were dying. And so they decided there were laws that were passed. I don't know when, but to say you can't do that. And then they found creative ways to use the sewage water as fertilizer, for example, back onto the crops. And then you've got, oh my God, all those chemicals it's a mess. I mean, I don't know. You really end up with huge problems when you put all that poison into the food and you're feeding people all these poisonous drugs, the chemotherapy, even something like metformin, which is treats diabetes, and lots of people take it. Turns out it's very sturdy. It sticks around, and it disrupts the reproductive system of the fish. It makes the fish actually become, bigender. They're very confused.
My God, another one.
Yeah, metformin. So, I mean, there's a lot of chemicals that cause disrupt the development of the sexual system. There's a lot of chemicals that do that. So it's not surprising that we have so many people who are confused about their gender.
Probably by design.
I don't know.
By the people that really don't care about humanity. It's very disturbing what's going on, because the chronic disease, you see it going up, and it's the problems with children.
Oh, I know. It's not just the autism. I focused on the autism, but they've got so many issues, and all the asthma and eczema and ADHD and various sensitivities to foods. Yes, obesity, and even type 1 diabetes is going up, even though it's a genetic disease, and type 2 diabetes is showing up in teenagers, and it's supposed to be an adult onset disease, and we're really in trouble. The kids, I'm really anxious about the future of the children, and also, of course, the reproductive health of the children, looking forward, whether they're going to be able to even have kids, because of all the poisons that they're exposed to.
Well, wouldn't that be population control?
It would work really well to get rid of us, I think so.
Yes,
maybe that's what I mean, we deserve.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm laughing, but you have to laugh, right? Or else you'd cry.
You could go cry. Yeah, exactly. No, I understand that the bees have been found to contain glyphosate as well.
Yeah, the honey, there've been papers. There was a big paper that looked at honey from all different countries and levels of glyphosate, and they found, really high levels of glyphosate in most of the honey in the United States. We really stood out. It was all across, it had Europe and Mexico, United States, all these different honeys, and you could see there was a big graph with lots of things, different, samples. And the ones from the U.S. were just really stood out as having lots of glyphosate in them, which is unfortunate. And I think the glyphosate's killing the bees. I think it's a major, major contributor to the bee colony collapse syndrome. We don't hear enough about that. But, we look at the insecticides, and it sort of seems obvious that an insecticide would kill an insect, right? So that's a logical place to start. But the fact is the glyphosate is working synergistically with the chlorpyrifos and causing the bees to collapse. I think it's very worrisome, because if we don't have bees, we're going to have a lot of trouble with pollinating our crops.
I think they said that if the bees are gone, we got 4 years and then we're done.
I saw that too. I hope it's not true.
I hope that's not true.
I think they're going to have little robotic bees flying around.
Oh yeah, they always got an answer, right?
Right.
Let's destroy the real thing, and then we'll give you some fake thing that really doesn't work. I guess one of the things that I was referring to besides the bees are the bees.
Oh, the bees. Okay, I thought you were talking
the bees
about
and the bees. No, both are important.
The bees are a good topic, and so are the bees. Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
And COVID-19, I definitely think that glyphosate is a contributor to bad outcome from COVID-19. We saw right away early on, they were seeing that obesity, for example, is a very big risk factor for bad outcome from COVID. Diabetes, obesity, heart disease, high blood pressure. These are all things that are caused by glyphosate. Right. And I think that the people who are most poisoned by the glyphosate are the ones that are most susceptible to a harsh disease when they catch COVID.
In obesity, the fat cells store a lot of the toxins as well.
Yes, that's right. Yes, and when you try to go on a diet and lose the weight, you get sick because the fat cells release the toxins.
All the toxins, yeah. It's just unbelievable, what's going on. Now, you had mentioned something else, if we might be able to talk about the ethanol.
The ethanol, yes, the bioethanol. In fact, all the biofuels. I'm quite concerned about that, and I've really been wondering whether that's played a role in COVID-19, and particularly when you look at the big cities. When I was looking back when when the COVID first hit, and started out in Wuhan, and then it showed up in northern Italy, and then it showed up in New York City. I don't know if you remember sort of where it was appearing.
Yeah.
And those are all big cities that are highly polluted, have a lot of air pollution, and that are big on glyphosate. First of all, in an area where glyphosate is heavily used, and in an area where biofuels are being developed. So New York City in particular has played a really big leadership role in promoting biofuels in the government. I mean, they have these buses that run on biodiesel, and then they're pushing for Of course, the U.S. government, we have the highest, I think, 10% bioethanol in our gasoline.
I just heard that I hate to call it an administration because I think it's a joke, but they are pushing for more ethanol in gasoline.
That's true. I think it's. We got an announcement that it's going to go up to 15%. I remember reading that. It's 10% now, and they want to bring it up to 15%. I think President Biden actually said that himself. He's going to increase it to 15%, which of course is going to make the situation even worse. And I think especially cars that are idling in the city, because of traffic jams, I suspect we're getting glyphosate released into the air through evaporation before it hits combustion. And I'm really pretty confident the bioethanol would have glyphosate in it because it's derived from these crops that are sprayed, heavily, right before harvest. Yeah, so I think it's almost impossible to imagine it's not there. And the glyphosate also disrupts the immune system in the lungs. And I believe that based on my studies in terms of this issue with the collagen, because there are these, and I wrote about it in my book, there are these proteins that are produced by the immune cells that are very effective at trapping viruses and then allowing them to be cleared. And those proteins have what's called a collagen-like stalk. And the collagen-like stalk, of course, has lots and lots of glycine in it. So I'm suspecting that those proteins are getting disrupted in the lungs. These are surfactant proteins in the lungs that can trap the viruses. And they're not able to get released by the cell into the surfactants, I suspect. This is all theoretical at this point, but I can see how that could be true, given if glyphosate is substituting for glycine, that's what would happen. And then you wouldn't be able to clear the virus effectively in the lungs, and it would be able to spread.
Wow. Oh, here's a good question from the dot connector. Can we use frequencies to combat glyphosate? Are you familiar with Sherry Edwards?
I know Sherry Edwards, yes.
Okay.
And it's possible. I mean, the frequencies, the situation is really a hard one. I mean, I think it's fascinating because it's certainly, I think that frequencies are really, the whole communication system of the body is probably based on frequencies. And there's all these
Yeah.
interesting ideas about how to use them for treatment. And it's so hard to tease out that signal, to figure out exactly what to do. So I know people have done glyphosate homeopathy. I think that's an interesting idea as well.
Oh wow.
Homeopathy with very low dose, do all this homeopathy process to get a very low dose glyphosate in the water and to use that to train the body to be able to deal with the glyphosate better. But that stuff is so hard to understand. So I have a hard time talking about it because it seems somewhat mystical. It's sort of, I'm easier. It's easier for me to talk about things where I can see the hard science. It's harder to figure all that stuff out. I think
with the homeopathy.
it's got to be really. It's just so complicated. We can't really understand it.
Well, one of the things the I thought I remembered reading something some time ago about low level glyphosate in our system is very bad. It's almost worse than high level, which doesn't make any sense.
Oh, that's right. No, that's so weird that these chemicals that are called endocrine disruptors have this property. It's actually well known at this point that they're much more toxic at very low doses than they are at higher doses. And this is something people even suspect that the industry had figured out because they had, and this was back when they were evaluating glyphosate. They claimed, first of all, you only have to look for 3 months. If you don't see anything, you're good to go. And secondly, if you don't see any obvious damage at a higher dosage, you don't have to look at a lower dosage. The dose makes the poison. So the idea is the more there is, the worse it is. So if it's okay at a higher dose, you don't have to look at anything lower. And I suspect they did that because they probably found that the lower dose was showing up to be more toxic than the higher dose. They didn't want people to know that because their whole game is to try to beat the system. They're not trying to make sure their product is safe.
No, all they care about is profit.
Right.
I mean,
so I think that, and glyphosate is an endocrine disruptor. And that was one of the things that that paper that I mentioned that was done by Seralini. That paper, by the way, got retracted and then it got republished by another journal. So there were people who were fighting against it. The paper that did the long-term study on the rats and showed all these problems that didn't show up until 4 months. And that was with a low dose.
Yeah, funny how they shut it off at 3 months, right?
Yeah, right.
As soon as all the problems start showing up. Oh, well, we did 3 months. That's good enough.
Exactly. Yeah.
Since when is 3 months good enough? That's just.
But what happened was after that paper was published in 2012, other papers started to look at that because no one was looking at low dose glyphosate. People thought it was a waste of money to do that study. But once these guys showed that it did have an effect, other studies started showing up. And we've seen a lot of studies recently, really in the last few years, studies that have been showing low dose glyphosate causing major problems and really showing endocrine disruption as a clear aspect of glyphosate's toxicity. And that really means just, for example, disrupting the sexual development is, for example, a very clear endocrine aspect. And I showed that plot with the problems with the male reproductive system. And there have been problems with the female reproductive system as well. There was a paper that just showed up recently looking at girl babies, and they showed the parents, the mother that had more glyphosate in the urine, there was a metric they could use that's an indicator of excess testosterone exposure in utero. And they showed that was correlated with the amount of glyphosate in the urine of the mom. And that metric, if you have the problem, then it's a predictor of polycystic ovary syndrome. You have a much higher risk of polycystic ovary syndrome, which is the most common problem that women have for reproductive issues.
And you know that I've also, one of the problems that's also related directly to that is iodine deficiency.
Interesting.
Yes, there's a woman that wrote a book called The Iodine Crisis, and she talks about just about any kind of fibrocystic or fibro. How do you say that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean.
Well, fibroids, right? Fibroids,
yes.
Which is
anyway. There's a question here, if that somebody from the audience is asking, may I ask if it has anything to do with low vitamin K?
Low vitamin K, yeah, that's interesting. I would expect so because vitamin K comes out of the shikimate pathway. So I think that's going to be another vitamin that's going to be affected by the glyphosate.
What doesn't it affect? Maybe that's what we.
I know. It's so complicated. It's why you can write a whole book on it. And I didn't even cover everything that could have been covered in my book. It's just too much. It's really
Yeah,
an amazing molecule.
I
Very
mean,
fascinating from this. It's a good probe into human physiology because it does so much damage. It helps you to understand how the body works, by virtue of how it's broken by glyphosate. And a lot of these things we didn't worry about. We didn't really notice the gut until we started getting exposed to glyphosate because it was working fine. We didn't realize how important the gut microbes are to our health until they got broken by glyphosate. Now we know. It's lots and lots of papers coming out showing the connection between the gut and the brain and all the different diseases that we get, tracing back to gut dysbiosis.
Here's another question for you. How does it affect our pets and animals? I imagine it's very similar to the way it affects us.
Yes, absolutely. And, the dogs, I feel like the dogs have really lost ground on life expectancy. I know when I was a child, I remember dogs used to live easily to 18, 19 years old. And now it seems like they die by the age of 12. I mean, it just seems like the dogs are living shorter and shorter lifespans. I feel that way since I was a child. And I wrote some stuff on the animals in my book. I talked specifically about the dogs and some of the conditions that they suffer from. And then Anthony Samsel tested a whole bunch of different dog foods and cat foods. We published that in one of the papers we wrote together. He found lots of glyphosate, even in the high end pet foods. There was a lot of glyphosate.
Oh, wow. So you almost, people are going to love this. You almost need to feed your animals organic food too.
I know. that gets to feeling ridiculous, but I think you're right. We just need to get the government to stop. The government actually did something good lately. I think they actually directed some funds towards promoting small organic farms. I remember reading something. I don't remember the details, but I think there was some good news coming out of the.
And somehow the soil needs to be remediated big time.
Absolutely.
I don't know if that would work with hemp or whatever. There is another question here that I can't bring up on the screen, but is glyphosate similar to xenoestrogens?
Probably, yeah. I mean, because those estrogen look alike estrogen disruptors, and soy, of course, soy itself has some properties like that, but there are various chemicals that pretend to be estrogen, and so they mess up the whole balance of the hormones. The hormone system gets really messed up, and hormones are so important for your well-being. So when you get this extra hormone coming in from a chemical, it really disturbs the whole system and causes bad outcomes.
So we're hit with a whole bunch of endocrine disruptors. And when we say endocrine disruptors, we're talking about disrupting our normal hormone levels.
That's right. And it's not just the sex hormones, but they're a big part of it, the thyroid hormone.
So many thyroid problems now, too.
Mm-hmm.
The chronic disease levels are just unbelievable. Wow. Somebody said, I had a dog that had stillborns, low vitamin in the blood. I also understand that the food for animals, they treat it at an extremely high heat, which usually destroys most nutrients.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that, but that would definitely cause problems. We get so hung up on, making sure there's no germs, right? We radiate the food and everything. We get rid of all the
pasteurize everything, radiate everything. Yeah, people forget about the radiation part.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's a mistake to think that you have to sterilize your food. I think you're missing a lot of important things that way. You're not getting a renewal of your microbiome because of that. I don't think it's a good idea.
I don't either. I really don't at all. We do have a pet company called Vitality Science, and Leela will be doing a show with her, and they have a lot of things to help animals, supplements and holistic approaches to animals, because people's animals are getting sick, and it's heartbreaking.
It is.
And the people that are young enough to have children, or their children are, I've never seen so many sick children.
It's frightening, isn't it? And it's very worrisome to know where we're headed. I hope we can get enough people to wake up. And if people start really pushing organic, buying organic, telling their friends and their family to buy organic, we'll encourage the farmers to grow organic. That's what we need to do. We need to really reverse the whole farm system to have much more organic food available because because of consumer pressure.
If
I
we
think
increase the demand for organic food, we would get more. Isn't that what
that's
you're
what I
saying?
think. I think the farmers would realize, and there would be it would be more value for them because increased demand will increase the price, which will be unfortunate. And I'd rather have those other people not eat organic so I can have it for myself. But that's a very selfish point of view. But if we can get more people to want organic, and if we won't buy the toxic food, they won't make it because they can't sell it. If enough people become aware, they won't buy it.
Right.
It'll just rot on the shelf. So they really, the farmers need to have the consumer pressure to be willing to take the steps it takes. And it's hard when you're not growing organic. You've got to go through a long process to clean up your soil before you can even get approval. So it's not easy for farmers to get back to the way they should be growing crops.
And then they can't get the kind of loans from the government that they give to
Right.
the big ones that use everything that makes us sick. So
Yeah, I wish the government would do some kind of subsidy to support the farmer through that phase when they're growing organic, but they can't call it organic because their soil is still in trouble. So then they can't get an organic price. And, they lose ground over those few years before they finally transition into a healthy organic crop. They need help. They need financial help to get them over that bridge so that they can get to the other side.
I've got a question that just came to mind. And you had mentioned earlier that isn't cane sugar, and it's highly glyphosated. I'm wondering, have they ever measured glyphosate levels in sugar?
Well,
Or
the government doesn't really measure it in anything, but other people have. And many of these candies are testing positive for glyphosate. I believe glyphosate is in all the sugars because you have the sugar cane is sprayed right before harvest. It's not on a GMO crop, but it's sprayed right before harvest as a desiccant. You get the high fructose corn syrup from the corn. The corn is a GMO Roundup Ready crop. And then you have beet sugar, and that's also a Roundup Ready crop. So all the sugars are
isn't
going to
it
be
Roundup
contaminated.
ready? What does it mean? It's ready for you to saturate it with poison.
That's right.
Oh my goodness, it's just it's terrible. Well, we're coming up. We've passed about an hour.
Yes, we have.
Um,
It went by quickly.
It sure did, because there was a few other things I was thinking about bringing up, but because some of the 5 points that you mentioned in your, but it's in your book, and we talk about the RNA too, micro RNA,
Oh,
and
yeah.
some of that. But since when? I've never seen anything like it about children getting myocarditis. Too.
Yeah, you want to bring up certain topics, don't you? I would love to
I
talk
do, but
about
I don't think we can.
that.
We'll have to do. We should do another
Keep
show,
this.
and do it only on the uncensored
Yeah, I'm sorry.
platforms, because if we talk about it here, well, they'll take it down. So we'll just leave it for now. And I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, and maybe we can do this again sometime. I think it's
That'd be great.
so important for people to know this.
I
I
know,
really
I
do.
agree. I really think and I just am so disappointed in the government for not seeing this with respect to COVID-19 to say, hey guys, you got to shape up, you got to eat well, and you got to get out in the sunlight. I want to mention that.
Oh, that's
Sunlight
important.
exposure.
I'm
That's
glad you
super,
brought that
super
up.
important.
Do you know, I'm just going to throw this out there now, because I'm sure most people don't realize it. But there are, just for example, right here in the state of Arizona, in Phoenix, in a jail system there, they hold people, and they are not allowed to go out in the sunlight. They don't see sun, and sometimes they're there for
Oh my
years.
God, that's awful. That's really, really
That
bad.
that's a fact.
Wow, that's really sad.
It's horrible. It's a crime.
It
I see it
is.
as a crime.
It is absolutely. Well, you're lucky to live in Arizona where there's lots of sun. So
Yeah.
maybe a little too hot sometimes, but
Sometimes, yeah, it's better in Sedona than it is in Phoenix, that's for sure.
yeah.
Um, but I think I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and explaining this. And we'll do this again. I would like to. There's some other things that I want to talk about. I would like to know. I would like to find out the frequency of different foods. You
Uh-huh.
know, because that's important. And also more on the nutrient levels of foods that haven't been measured for years. They haven't measured any of them since they introduced all the GMO crops. I
Yeah,
don't
I
know.
wonder why.
Yeah,
I'm sure they
I think
don't
they
want to
already
find out.
know. Yeah, they already know is my guess. But anyway, we live in a very toxic environment, and it's so important for people to try to detox in various ways and to eat organic food. I don't want
Yes,
to hear from you that it's too expensive. Your health is your wealth.
absolutely.
And
Well
once
said.
you lose it, it's so hard to get it back. It's much easier to prevent than it is to treat later down the road.
Absolutely. And you're going to feel so much better too. Not just, all the bills you have to pay for the
Yes,
health problems, but you're going to feel a whole lot better, a lot
the
more
very
energy.
quality of life.
Hmm.
Did you and your husband notice a difference when you switched?
Absolutely.
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 See.
Yes. And of course, I couldn't believe he could just turn around his diabetes like that. It was
Hmm.
amazing.
And I think it's also important to remind people that the non-GMO project doesn't mean that it doesn't have glyphosate in it.
No, that's really important. A lot of people think non-GMO is good, and it's not necessarily. It can have very high levels of glyphosate, so you have to be careful.
Yeah, I wasn't as much aware of that as I should have been either, because I didn't think it was that bad, but it is, and so there you have it.
Great. Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's always a pleasure and a delight. Thank you so much for your work. It's very important work, and keep it up. We need people like you bringing forward this kind of information because the government just isn't telling us right now.
I know we need a different government for sure.
We
We need
definitely
something.
do. I couldn't agree more. Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Stephanie.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much.
Bye
And
bye.
I'll send you copies and so on when we get the reruns. Thank you so
Great.
much.
Thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye.